All right. So I'm not even going to get into an intro because we literally just did about 7.5 minutes of this recording. We were going in. There was some good stuff dropped. But that's a coaching point right there, right? I ain't gonna lie, it's frustrating. I had 30-minute videos where this has happened and I didn't get picked up and I had to redo it. So with that being said, let's do this again. It's Nick here. It's Caitlyn. We're just gonna go into it. Emotional intelligence. What is it? How do you build it? What does it mean?
So I think with emotional intelligence, a lot of people they look at it from one perspective in terms of, okay, what emotions am I feeling? Are they good or bad for me? And then they make a decision from there on how they want to react to it. However, emotional intelligence has a lot more components to it than like what you see on the surface. So the first one being, yes, you want to be self-aware of your own emotions. However, you also want to have the social awareness component. So being aware of other people's emotions when you walk into a room. That's the idea of, read the room. So being able to read the room and being able to empathize, a lot of times this is where empathy comes into play. So being able to empathize with the emotions of other people that you're interacting with in a room. And then there's also the relationship management side of emotional intelligence where it might be managing your relationship, whether it's a romantic relationship or friendship or coworker, coach, teammates, whatever relationship it is, but it's being able to work in skill set and in harmony with that relationship, or being able to work together as two individuals, three individuals to work together, understand each other's emotions, again, with empathy and understanding, and being able to come to some sort of common ground.
You mentioned something. I like this, and I love analogies. Give me the funeral analogy you just gave.
Okay. So the funeral analogy, to help explain like the social awareness side of things, it's like if I were to walk into a room and there's a funeral going on, I'm probably not going to walk into that room and just start cracking jokes right off the bat. What you want to do is probably be able to empathize and understand, the emotions that everyone's feeling, whether that funeral or that person's passing, directly impacted you or indirectly impacted you. You need to make sure that you're still understanding what's going on in that room.
And I would argue on the other side, using emotional intelligence, let's say poor Johnny, he passed sadly, but he was always the life of the party. And he goes up, or his friend goes up to do the eulogy and he cracks a joke. Mm-hmm. And everyone's like laughing, is like, wait, this is a funeral, but there's like, that's how Johnny would have wanted it. So that could be like the other side of the emotional intelligence, understanding, because it doesn't mean just being overly serious. It just means knowing in the given parameters of the situation, reading the room, like you said. And it's funny that you say that because one of my mentors, Dr. Ryan Sherman, he's a personality psychologist, and he had a research study called the situation study. And his lab was actually called the situation lab. And what we did was we had people wear these little cameras. They're called storyteller cameras. It was some new technology. And every 30 seconds, it took a picture. So you wore it right here. So you would go through your whole day. So as a research assistant, I had to do it too, just to fill it out. So I went through all my day. So a whole day, school, work, life. And it said, take it off if there's any reason you shouldn't have it on. Obviously, shouldn't be doing anything illegal, but you probably want to have it on for that. But basically, I don't do nothing illegal, by the way. But I went through each day or the day, and we had to sort it into situations. Now, the beauty of the study was each situation was dictated by what I thought. So I asked him, what if it was like waking up to brush my teeth to driving to work to come to the lab? It's like, well, if that's how you see it, sure. Or it could be literally from brush your teeth to lab is one situation. So going back to the understanding the room, reading the room, perception, we got to understand the overall view of what we're doing to even be emotionally intelligent.
Yeah. So with that, you just bringing up perception just brought to the forefront of my mind, my lesson that I did when I was teaching my university kids this week. One point that I really wanted to drive home with them is, the idea that your perception creates your own reality. So a lot of times what you may perceive about yourself, this was in a lecture about self-awareness and emotional intelligence. So what you might perceive about yourself, somebody else looking at you might perceive something totally different. So I actually did an activity with my kids this week where they had one group was doing a puzzle, and then each person was assigned somebody that was going to observe them. So they had 4 minutes to work on this task, doing this puzzle. And then the other people observing them had this sticky note and would write down any observations they made. So, one kid wrote down when he was observing another peer was, she looked focused, motivated, quiet, and wasn't a team player, wasn't a good communicator. And it was because that girl completing the task kind of kept to herself. She worked more independently, and she was just focused, motivated to get as many pieces together as she could. So from his perspective, he saw that she wasn't really that good of a communicator. She was more like independent and was just kind of like secluding herself from the group. Whereas when I asked her, so then I had them exchange sticky notes at the end. It was, okay, like, what do you agree with? What do you disagree with? How self-aware are you? how did your perception differ from their perception? And she had actually said, she's like, I wouldn't say that I'm like a bad with teamwork or anything like that. But I would say that I wanted to work more independently on the task,
Mhm.
which I thought really helped me drive home the point of like your perception really does create your own reality and you can't control what other people think about you
No.
at all.
That's a powerful point because we get caught up as humans and we're all guilty. I'm guilty of it, of thinking, what do they think of me? And it's not wrong because you should have a care of it. But like you said, if you think what they're thinking and you're completely wrong, you hinder your performance. And regardless of what they think, your performance is what you have to live with. So
Mhm.
now it's like you hindered your performance for someone who didn't even think that of you.
Mhm.
And now you're not where you need to be or you didn't get what you wanted to get simply off of a thought that wasn't there in the
Mhm.
first place. Like you ever walk by someone and whatever preconceived notions, you may not say a single word, but you might just see them. You might think, what do they think about me? Not like you care, but more so, did they like, I don't know how to say it, like, not to say that they appeal to you or you appeal to them, but just more so you cross paths, even if it's just a quick hello. There's a quick thought of like, what was their perception of me?
Mhm.
You may not live by it, obviously. I hope not, but sometimes people do,
Sometimes it
depending.
slips up. Yeah.
So it's like, why, like, what would be the thing like for someone who does deal? Because I know there is people out there who over assume and they make these like these preconceived notions of what a person thinks of them, where it now dictates their day now, and now they're thrown off of their day or their grind or whatever it is.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. I mean, I think the biggest thing is just making sure that, we are conscious of us creating our own reality and being self-aware and in that moment of realizing like, oh crap, like I'm having like this thought about what somebody else thinks about me. Do I really, and asking yourself in reflection, like, do I really want that to affect me for the rest of the day? And so I think that that would be my biggest piece of advice. And that's something that like I've talked to countless clients and athletes that I've worked with on is, thinking about like whether it's the car ride home with mom and dad and what mom and dad might have saw from your performance. Do you really want like maybe you saw something different, maybe from their perspective, they thought that you were being lazy on a play, but from your perspective, maybe you just had a bad first jump on the ball and it wasn't you
Mhm.
being lazy. So it's a matter of okay, being aware that people are going to see other things, but being able to just kind of keep trekking despite them maybe seeing something a little bit differently than you. Be more open minded in a
Open
sense.
minded, interesting. That term gets used a lot. So on that note of open mindedness, use a term also called emotional regulation. So where does that come into play, and what is that?
So with emotion regulation, you know, a lot of times, again, segueing into sports, it's, a lot of times you have an emotion that might be felt because something bad happens or something good happens. There's positive emotions, there's bad emotions that come through sports. So you had asked me earlier whether or not, what emotion I see when I'm working with my athletes. And the first thing that came to my head was anger and frustration. And the reason why I answered anger and frustration immediately was because that's just the one that is put on display more
Mhm.
through reactions and through body language. However, after really thinking about it and answering your question some more earlier, it was the end of the day, probably like 80% of the time that my athletes are with me, they're motivated, they're confident, they're, driven or, all these more positive emotions. And I just thought it was ironic that the first thing that came to my head was anger and frustration, just because that's what I see showcased on display. And that's the emotion that I give more attention to as a coach because I see anger and frustration. I'm like, hey, knock that off. Or I give them
Mhm.
some sort of other stimulus to be able to change that. Something that I've been working on with clients actually now, both softball, baseball players, and emotion regulation was me trying to find an applied sense to implement being able to regulate your emotions in a timely manner and being able to alter your response to them. So, one phrase that I've come up with is respond, don't react. Is when you hear those two words, yes, they sound pretty synonymous and they mean
Mhm.
almost the same thing in like a general context. But when you really think about it, when you react in sports, that sounds a lot worse in a sense, emotion wise. It sounds a lot worse than just simply responding. Don't really know
Mhm.
how to explain the connotation side of those two words, but I just feel like that phrase has really driven a lot of good points home for
I
me in
think
working with clients and athletes.
I may say it like react is more so just an instant of what's happening here and now and just go, while respond is let me calculate what else could come with this reaction. Because like you said, they're synonymous. A response is still giving a reply to something, whether it be a dynamic physical thing in a
Mhm,
sport or whether it be saying something back to someone who might have made you mad.
mhm,
So someone who reacts is just I'm instantly taking what just happened at the surface and then go, while the response is like, okay, is there more to this? Because
Mhm.
sometimes
Mhm.
communication, people always say communication is key, but I'll argue that they don't ever try to put it in the lock, if
Mhm.
that makes sense. Like, you can have all the keys, but do they, because it's cliche to say that, but what you just said with the response versus react brings that to real time, that you have to take in consideration of how do you respond or react to this versus just saying, oh, I need to be more communicative. But it's like, you're not doing the things that's going to benefit. Because if I just go with the first thing I think, you may have not meant ill harm to what I
Mhm.
said or what you said, I mean, but I take it that way and I just react. Now we could make our relationship even worse now
Yes.
because of that. But when you respond,
Mhm.
now it's like, okay, I could be wrong, but maybe they didn't mean it. What if they did mean to hurt? They could
Yeah.
have meant to hurt you.
Yeah, and that's also being open-minded too, and just
Mhm.
being aware of, and perception, just how just being open-minded in the fact that, okay, maybe they just perceived that I was saying it in this way. If they were wrong, let me just explain myself a little bit more, dive a little bit deeper. So I like how you kind of differentiated the respond react for me, in a sense that, like, response is, thinking a little bit more beyond that surface level and not just reacting on the surface.
Mhm. Mhm. So to wrap it all up, give, say, one thing they could take home right now and just be like, no, how do I build my emotional intelligence? It could be a phrase, it could be a quick story, whatever it is. Leave them with something how they can improve just right now. They can go out today after hearing this to improve their emotional intelligence.
I think if I were to give people, one main piece of advice to walk away with in terms of, emotional intelligence, it's being able to take in all factors of your emotions, whether it's your emotions that you're feeling in response to something that you are doing or in response to something that other people are doing. So being able to, zoom out and view things from a broader lens and be more understanding and open-minded towards those things.
I like that. That's good because a lot of times people don't look beyond themselves. I argue with, not argue, but I talk to a lot of people who I'll say something like, "You gotta look outside your own bubble," because they'll be like, "Well, my friend's this," or "I don't see this on my Instagram story," and it's like, "Well, you're only one part of the world."
Mhm.
I think that's a very powerful tool because when you can get in, like, I always have to bring the cognitive side of it too, is the more connections your brain can make to see things, the more it has to play with. And it's like resources. Do you want to bake a cake with only one egg? Do you want egg, the baking powder, the flour,
Mhm.
the milk, all
Mhm.
that, so sprinkles? You need all of that. So that same thing with having an open mind. You have to give yourself the option to see everything. You may not use it. Like I would say, take what you need and throw out what you don't.
Mhm.
But at least you had it to even use in the first place. So
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Just the idea of being able to have all the tools in your toolbox, in a sense, and you take what you need when you need it.
nice stuff. All right. So we'll sign out with that and thank you guys and get your mind right.